Okay, so this is the Bible study for First Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. So just a short text for today. And the text says, "Now about your love for one another, we do not need to write you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love each other. And in fact, you do love all God's family throughout Macedonia. Yet we urge you, brothers and sisters, to do so more and more, and to make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. You should mind your own business and work with your hands just as we told you, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, and so that you will not be dependent on anybody." All right, a short and to the point text, perhaps deep and maybe a little controversial. We'll see. So remember that you can download PDF copies of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us. And the number one says, what was last week's text 4:1-8 about? A, living in order to please God. Obviously, last week we did a little bit more than that, but that was the end of last week's text. B, doing so more and more. C, God's will that we should be sanctified. And D, avoiding sexual immorality and controlling our bodies. So he begins by telling us that we should live in order to please God. And then it says to do so more and more. That's in verse 1. And in verse 3, it says it's God's will that you be sanctified, and then that you should avoid sexual immorality as a part of our sanctification, and that we should control our bodies and not live in passionate lust like the pagans do. So that was last week's text, and it sets the stage for this week. So it's important to kind of sort of have some continuity as we're studying the text. Number 2 says, what were the Thessalonians known for? According to 4:9, it says, "Now about your love for one another, we do not need to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love each other. And in fact, you do love all God's family throughout Macedonia." I went a little beyond verse 9 there, but it seems like he says we don't have to tell you about this because you have been taught by God, and you actually love people sort of not only there in Thessalonica but beyond that in the entire region in Macedonia. And so you're sort of known abroad beyond your local church for your love for each other and for others beyond your local church too. Number 3 says, what does yet imply in verse 10? So it says, "Yet we urge you," and that's not at the beginning of verse 10, but in the middle of verse 10. "Yet we urge you to do so more and more." So what does the yet imply? A, they're doing everything well. B, like therefore or for in biblical texts, it is a word we should pay close attention to. C, when we think that we are already doing something well, it's easy to become complacent and not allow God to grow us as he wants to. So the yet sort of does not, everything before the yet suggested that they're doing it well, but the yet says, yet, in other words, you may be doing everything well. I'm not saying that they aren't. If A is not the answer, it's not because they aren't. It's because that's not what the yet means. The yet says, so I've seen arguments like this where somebody says, "But I'm doing so good," and the other person says, "Yeah, you are, but you could be doing better." And then the other person says, "Yeah, I could be doing better, but I'm doing so good." And the other person says, "Yeah, you are, but you could be doing better." And it's like a circle. There's no out from this. And so sometimes in that argument, the person that's a common thing when I'm doing any kind of marriage counseling, honestly. But sometimes the person is not sort of giving kudos as they should for what for the progress that has been made. Sometimes that's the case, but oftentimes the person that's not giving the kudos, the reason they're not giving the kudos is because you think you're doing so well that you don't need to get better, and if I give you kudos, then you'll just sit and rest right where you are. And so A is not wrong in terms of it is what seems to be happening. They are doing well. But if they rest on that, on how well they are doing, they will never push to get better. And so sometimes that yet is an important part of our growth. Sometimes that challenge that you are doing well, yet you could be doing even more. And so don't stop with, I'm doing well. Instead, say, I'm doing well, but what does God have for me next? And then we don't have to get into this argument. And I would say, like, therefore, and for in biblical text, this word is a word we should pay close attention to. I agree with that. I think that's right. Um, and C also is true in what I was trying to say in explaining A. When we think we are already doing something well, it is easy to become complacent and not allow God to grow us as he wants to. So, Paul's focus in this verse is to give them kudos. He praises them for their love and how well he knows that they love others. Yet, so he praises them, but does not want to only praise them and set them up for becoming complacent and not growing. Number four, why does Paul write them about loving each other if he says in the very statement that he doesn't need to write them about it? This is a continuation of the more and the more that he was talking about in the previous section. And he says that, yet we urge you, brothers and sisters, to do so more and more. So if we were already talking about the sort of life of growth and sanctification that we have, this is another part of that more and more. I recognize that you are loving well. You're loving each other. You're loving even beyond your local church, but I'm urging you to do so more and more. Paul often initiates correction by telling the church they are doing well, not unlike John's letters to the churches in Revelation. So sometimes Paul might be writing a letter like this to recognize that they have done well, but he wants to point out that he sees some tendency towards complacency, or he sees this area where they're not doing as well. And in this area, he's going to bring correction. So here you're doing well, yet, and he may be using this to point out, to bring some correction, and that correction may be that they have done well, but they seem to be resting on that instead of continuing to grow in the Lord. See, although they love each other on the surface, Paul sees aspects of what it might look like to love each other that they are missing. And by the way, if you say, I'm good at loving others, I can probably tell you someplace that you could do better. And if I said I'm good at loving others, you could probably tell me someplace that I could do better. And the point is, let's do so more and more. Let's get better. Let's grow. Number five, what does Paul mean by saying they should aspire to a quiet life and work with their hands in 4, 11, and 12? There were some who were idle and not being productive. See Second Thessalonians 6 through 15. It says, let's see, um, I think it's 3, 6 through 15. Um, It says, for we hear that there are some who walk among you in a disorderly manner, not working at all, but are busybodies. Now those, now those who are such, we command and exhort, I don't know what translation this is I'm reading, to work in quietness and eat their own bread. But as for you, brethren, do not grow weary in doing good. So it's First of all, Second Thessalonians 3, 6 through 15. And yes, in that church, apparently there were some people who were idle and being busybodies. Idleness tends to lead you to get into other people's business, become a busybody, which is usually a recipe for something other than love. So it's not, so yeah, this sounded like a lot of praise, and now comes the correction, and we start to realize that he's telling them, here is a way that you could probably improve on your love. Why don't you guys get busy doing something with your hands, doing something significant, and you're not going to be tempted to be bored and get involved in things that you don't need to, and not be as loving for others as you should be. See, when we are idle and depend on others for support, it is their work that provides for us. While they may be happy to do it for us, it is not best for us to put them in that position if we are able to support ourselves. So let's process this. Everybody likes the idea of being supported by somebody else. But one, being supported by somebody else is, if we are able to support ourselves, is one, not best for us. Two, taking advantage of somebody else and not loving for them. And some people will say, oh, I'm not taking advantage of anybody. I get a government check. Oh, so you're taking advantage of all of us, and our hard work, which we pay into the tax system that allows for that. Now, if you are not able-bodied, if you are a person who justly deserves the assistance and cannot provide for yourself, that's not who I'm talking to. I'm talking to people who could be working but have chosen not to, and instead to depend on somebody else. And that's something that was drilled into me by my dad. In fact, when I left my engineering job and went into ministry and was at a pay level where I received Medicaid for a time, and they paid for my second son to be born, and I mentioned that that was the case. My dad looked at me and he said, "You're welcome." And his point was, I want you to remember that somebody worked hard to provide that for you. And I was working at the time, but it it's not that people shouldn't have it if they need it. It is that if we don't need it, we should not come to depend on it. And by the way, our country has created a situation where some people have come to depend on it when they shouldn't have needed it in the first place. Um, and when I hear somebody say, well, I would get a job, but I don't want to get a job because I'd lose my SSI, I say that person could get a job and they are choosing not to, and choosing not to support their family themselves in favor of allowing others to support them. And that is not living with integrity, honestly. And um, um, that is not living according to the instructions in scripture, honestly. And that is setting yourself up to be idle, and probably to get yourself into all sorts of trouble sitting at home collecting a check when you should have been working. D says some people are out for recognition and notoriety instead of being an example in their faithful obedience to God. This is not the life that God calls us to. So there's a lot sort of packed into that one instruction that we can sort of extrapolate. Number 6, are you doing something productive with your time, or are you being idle? So how much time do you waste versus how much time do you work and invest in others? That's a really important. Um, let's just be honest and evaluate ourselves and reflect on that. Number 7, are you pursuing notoriety, or are you living a quiet life that could be example for others? to those around you. So I think let me just kind of backtrack a little bit because it says live a quiet life. Sometimes we don't work and we should work. Sometimes we work and we're very motivated, but our motivations are to sort of heap things upon ourselves, whether it be money and things or whether it be notoriety. And so some people are very motivated, and lack of motivation is not their problem. Lack of work and idleness is not their problem, but they're doing it all to heap things upon themselves, and they should be just working for the good of God and others, not working to sort of bring um, attention to themselves. And what are you doing? How are you doing? I'll just say in my life, I have never been, I won't say never, but generally it's been sort of ingrained in me a work ethic. So I have not been tempted to be lazy extensively. All of us are tempted to laziness sometimes, but I would never not work if I could work. It's just not been. Sometimes I'm working 2 and 3 jobs. That's never been my problem. But sometimes my motivations have been my problem. And sometimes I'll be honest, I've worked to gain notoriety or be thought of well and had wrong motivations and sort of been pursuing career advancement or something like that when I should have been just working for the glory of God. And so that has been more of my temptation. Number 8, are you listening to the more and more that God still may want to work on in your life, even though you may be doing well in some areas? Yes or no? And what is He working on in you? And this would be a great opportunity for some of us to share some things that God is working. How are we growing? Is there more and more in our life, or have we stagnated and stalled out?